Since February 2026, the United States and Israel have conducted major military operations against Iran. Iran has retaliated. The Straits of Hormuz has become a major strategic point, and the conflict has now entered a dangerous phase in which military action and diplomacy are proceeding simultaneously. The real question is, will the United States resume or substantially expand the war? And if it does, what would the operation look like? Firstly, the possibility of further US attacks. At present, we would assess the possibility of a major new offensive as significant, but not inevitable. President Trump has repeatedly threatened further military action while simultaneously pursuing negotiations. More recently, he has described the American strategy as applying economic pressure rather than immediately launching into another major offensive. But the military operations remain viable. The triggers would be, firstly, a collapse of negotiation. Secondly, continued disruption of the Strait of Hormuz. And thirdly, evidence that Iran is rebuilding strategic capabilities that Washington considers unacceptable. The United States does not have to necessarily destroy Iran. However, it would prevent Iran from rebuilding the military and strategic capabilities that Washington believes threaten American forces, Israel, and the Gulf states. What would the US force look like? If Washington decided to escalate, we would expect the operation to rely overwhelmingly on air, missile, naval, electronic, and intelligence power rather than a ground invasion. A ground invasion would be expensive in human lives, which would not be acceptable to the US public. The United States has the ability to combine long-range bombers, carrier aviation, land-based aircraft, cruise missiles, submarines, drones, and electric warfare assets, and extensive intelligence surveillance assets. The Phase 1 would be designed to achieve air superiority and suppress military capabilities. Phase 2, which could possibly be from D1 to D5, would concentrate on strategic military infrastructure, missile forces, command systems, and other capabilities considered essential to Iran's ability to continue the conflict. But there is an important distinction away from the previous precedents. This is not the Iraq War of 2003. Iran is vastly larger, geographically much more difficult, heavily populated, and capable of imposing very substantial costs to an occupying force. Therefore, a more probable US strategy would be, firstly, degrade Iran's nuclear and missile capability. Secondly, destroy command and control structures. Thirdly, restore the freedom of navigation. And lastly, achieve political regime change. Iran's response would be on the missile bases of the US in the Gulf, activation of proxies like the Hezbollah, Houthis, and Iraqi militants, and cyber attacks on US infrastructure. What would be the broad force application, and how long will the new operation last? A renewed major air campaign could begin extremely rapidly, and the first stage would probably be intense and concentrated. The second stage would depend entirely on Iran's response. If Tehran accepted negotiations after suffering further military damage, the operations could be relatively short. If Iran instead attacked American bases, Gulf infrastructure, or commercial shipping, the conflict could become a prolonged and regional war. This is where the Straits of Hormuz becomes decisive. Today, traffic through the strait has fallen dramatically. Two UAE oil tankers were attacked on the 14th of August, while Washington has threatened continuing economic pressure, both naval and political. Therefore, Hormuz has become the most important battlefield itself. Who would help the United States? Firstly, Israel would almost certainly remain the most important military partner. Its contribution would principally involve intelligence, air defense, surveillance, and operations against Iranian capabilities threatening Israel. The Gulf states would prefer a more complicated role. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain have strong reasons to prevent Iran from dominating the Gulf. But they also have equally strong reasons to prevent a wider regional war. Britain and the other Western partners could provide intelligence, maritime and logistical assistance, although the extent of direct combat participation would be a political decision and is highly unlikely. China and Russia. China's likely response would be primarily diplomatic and economic and would be focused on, firstly, energy and commercial interests in the Gulf and would strongly oppose prolonged disruption of oil supplies and international shipping. Secondly, China could increase economic and diplomatic support for Tehran without necessarily entering the war directly. Thirdly, Russia would similarly condemn American action and could deepen military, intelligence, and economic cooperation with Iran. Fourthly, one thing is clear: neither China nor Russia is likely to risk a direct war with the United States or Iran itself. Their strategy is more likely to be support Iran, weaken American influence, and avoid direct confrontation. The United States possesses overwhelming conventional military superiority and can further severe damage on Iran. But military superiority does not automatically produce political victory. Iran can retaliate through missiles, drones, maritime destruction, cyber operations, and regional partners. The United States, therefore, faces a strategic choice. Either it can attempt to force Iran into a settlement through continued economic and military pressure, or it can expand the war to accept the risks of a much wider regional context. At this moment, the evidence suggests that Washington is trying to keep the military option open while using economic pressure and negotiations to obtain its objectives. Trump has recently indicated preference for pressure rather than an immediate launching of another major offensive. The decisive issue, therefore, is not whether America can defeat Iran militarily. The real question is whether the United States can convert their military advantage into a political settlement without being drawn into an open-ended Middle East war. A lot will depend on the internal dynamics in the United States. America has probably already won enough of the military contest. The danger now lies if it fails to recognize when it has acquired enough leverage to stop fighting and convert a military victory into a strategic stalemate. How many flags must touch the sky before the marching stops? How many towers must we build before the last stone drops? We count the battles won and lost as if the scale will tip to find the final ounce of proof upon a bloodless lip. The soul does not require a crown nor fields of conquered foes. It only needs the quiet earth where simple mercy grows.